bat demons, banshees, hellhounds, and more. I hope you're ready for some of the absolutely crazy creatures people have allegedly seen that come straight out of folklore and mythology. It'll make 2020 sound like a joyful year. So buckle in and have your ancestors on speed dial, because these folklore monsters are about to wreak havoc. Enjoy these stories, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. I'll be preparing scripts for Lost in the Woods, demon encounters, sleepovers, and security guard stories as soon as I can. Now, let's begin. McDonald's Night Shift, from Cereza. I used to work at a McDonald's that was open 24/7 in a small part of my town. I live in a city, but the restaurant itself was situated in an isolated part of the suburbs, which bordered farmland and woods. I've quite a few unnerving stories from my experiences there, but all of them pale in comparison to the one I'm about to tell you. After the recent firing of another employee, I was rotated to fill the hole left in the typical night crew. As you may know, McDonald's doesn't use set shifts, but instead fills in employees to time blocks as needed. As I was a recent hire, they had no issue flipping my schedule around. I was only informed Sunday by my boss that I'd be working from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. that week. Begrudgingly, I went to sleep as late as I could, which ended up being around 5 in the morning on Monday. That way I'd be better prepared for my new shift. When I arrived at the restaurant, it surprised me how quiet it was. There were no customers in the building, and the other employees seemed to be keeping to themselves. We weren't a restaurant equipped for DoorDash or anything like that, so there wasn't really much work to be done until someone came in the door or through the drive-thru. The other employees didn't talk to me at all. The only one that did was the only other woman working in the restaurant. I'll call her Sarah. She told me the current staff already had the kitchen taken care of, and said I should just work the front of the restaurant. I found it weird that she was instructing me like that, despite not being a manager. But as it didn't seem like one was on duty anyway, I listened to her, and set myself down behind the register. From where I was seated, I had a pretty nice view into the front of the restaurant. I could see part of the parking lot, which was only illuminated by a single sodium lamp, the kind that glowed a pale orange. To the left of the lot was the road, and to the left of the road were the suburbs, which slowly dissolved into rural territory. Grass grew a few feet high, and a thick forest began about 50 yards from the street, and stretched as far as I could see. I spent most of my time on the phone and gazing out the front windows. We only had about 4 or 5 customers an hour. Only once that week did a group of people actually come in. It was early Wednesday morning when 3 rather tall, pale-faced guys entered the store wearing full camouflage outfits, with the pattern broken by the brightly colored hats on top of their heads. It was a welcomed sight, as they were energetic and talkative. After they told me what they wanted, I casually asked why they were dressed like hunters, considering it was 1 a.m. All of them grew silent, and the one closest to me said they didn't have the opportunity to change since they got dressed. I found that pretty odd, but didn't ask any other questions as I handed him his order number, which was really just a formality considering it was the only order at the time. After they got their food, they sat down at the booth closest to the door. As they ate, I thought I caught them glancing at me every now and then. I probably could have forgotten about it if it weren't for what happened next. After the men finished eating, 2 of them stood up by the door, as the one who I spoke to previously came up to me. In his very thick country accent, he said the following, which I still remember word for word. "Be careful, doll. There be some weird things in these here woods." He maintained eye contact as he said this, and he backed up slowly, not waiting for a response, before he turned around and left the restaurant with his friends. Nothing else out of the ordinary happened that night, but I still couldn't shake what the man had said to me. The following night, I started another shift. It was very rainy out, though the shift itself was uneventful and, if anything, slower than the other days. It must have been around 11 when it first happened. Stopping to look up from the register, I saw a figure outside of the restaurant. I adjusted my glasses and squinted my eyes, but I still couldn't make it out fully. From what I could tell, it was a man. It looked like he was wearing a large trench coat. He was standing at the very edge of the streetlight in the parking lot, right where the pavement met the tall grass. I kept staring at him, and he didn't move. I probably watched this peculiar man for a good few minutes before I looked away, and in all that time I could really only see that he was very tall. I turned around, and through the gaps in the kitchen hardware I could see my coworkers, which did relax me a little. I was just about to say one of their names to get them to come look at the man, but as I turned around, I saw that he was no longer there. He had vanished. I recalled the hunter's words from the night before as I tried to rationalize it. Why would some guy be out there standing still in a McDonald's parking lot so late at night? No new cars were outside, so I knew he wasn't preparing to come in for food. Finally, I assumed he was just walking home and had stopped under the streetlight to check his phone for directions, or something along those lines. It didn't make much sense otherwise, but that explanation was enough to calm my nerves. We only got a few customers between when I first saw the man and when I saw him next, which was a while past 1 in the morning. I know because I was just checking my phone when I looked up out the window and I saw him again. Only this time, he was closer. I could make him out better because he had moved in from the very edge of the light and was now directly under it. His face was still in shadow, or something, because I couldn't see it. I could clearly make out his coat, however. It was large and long. It seemed to be a deep brown leather or facsimile, and it glistened under the orange of the light from the shine the rain gave to it. It also looked tattered, with large gashes in the fabric. I could hardly see the man himself, though. However, it was clear under the light that he was very tall. He was right next to one of the employees' cars, and he stood at least 4 feet higher than the roof of it. My chest tightened, and it started to become hard to breathe. He continued to stand, staring in the direction of the restaurant. Even though the windows were tinted from the outside, it felt like he was looking right at me. This time, I kept my eyes on him, and I called for Sarah. She came out from the kitchen a few seconds later, asking me what I needed. I could only point mouth wide open at the man. She saw him too, and walked forward a few paces. "Who is that?" she asked. "I don't know. He was just there." Sarah moved towards the door, and to my unease, she opened it. From there, she called out to the perfectly still man. "Hello?" She paused, eliciting no response before saying something else. "Can I help you?" At this, the man, or whatever it was, took off. Almost instantly, it spun itself around and bolted in the direction of the woods. As it did this, I saw its legs rather clearly as the coat picked up from the wind resistance. What I saw chilled me. The legs were twisted or backwards. It looked almost like a dog's legs, only far longer. Sarah saw it too, and walked back inside without hesitation. She looked at me, expressionless, before muttering that if it came back, I should call her. She then returned to the kitchen, saying nothing else. I was in a daze for a little while after that. What just happened had felt surreal to me. I couldn't fathom what that thing was or how Sarah could remain so cool about it. Thankfully, though, the thing never returned during the rest of the shift, and I got home safely. That day, I did not sleep well at all. I remember waking up and falling back to sleep constantly, all the while anxious about that creature. When I awoke that afternoon, I decided against my better judgment to get prepped for work again. I didn't want to risk seeing the thing from the night before, but at the same time, I needed the money badly. When the night finally came, I was dreading my shift. As I finally pulled into the parking lot, I realized, to my horror, the streetlight that hung over the parking lot was out. I couldn't see what the damage was as it was nighttime, and the closest working light was a good 75 yards away. The parking lot felt more unsafe than it ever had. My entire walk to the restaurant, I was imagining the creature peering at me from the very edge of the darkness. That night, there were no customers. I mean, absolutely none. The restaurant felt so lonely, and even more so when I found out Sarah hadn't clocked in. One of the people working in the back told me she called in sick when I asked about her. Between my only friend in the workplace being gone, no customers coming in, and my phone being out of power, the night was excruciatingly slow. Though I could barely see a foot outside of the restaurant since the light was out, I could have sworn that on many occasions I saw a figure moving, just out of sight. Somehow I managed to make it through the majority of my shift. I was looking at the store clock, which read 2:59 when it happened. Without warning, the front window on the left side of the door shattered, and as it did, a large rock came through. It skidded along the floor before arriving just on the other side of my till. I was frozen in terror and surprise. 2 of the kitchen staff came out when they heard the noise, asking me what had happened. I just pointed at the window as I bent down and picked up the rock. To my astonishment, the rock was hot to the touch, almost burning my hand as I picked it up. Soon after that, we called the police. They arrived rather quickly, taking our statements and doing not much else. After locking up the store, we called it a night due to the vandalism and headed home early. It was rather awkward with everyone leaving at the same time, because where my car was, I had to wait until everyone filed out of the parking lot to leave myself. Just as I was about to pull away, though, I saw something truly terrifying. Out of the passenger window, I saw the creature again. It was standing up on the roof of the restaurant, towering above it, ominously. Again, there were no lights nearby, and I could only make out its silhouette, a deep black on the dark purple early morning sky. But I knew it was there. As I stared at it, paralyzed, it seemed to drop its coat, and as it did, I noticed the silhouette grow noticeably skinnier. It was then that I saw it outstretch its arms, and it flapped them, revealing a massive pair of wings. Without any further delay, it took off into the sky, and with it I heard a sharp, ear-piercing noise, which I can only compare to when a fast vehicle breaks the speed of sound. As soon as it was clear from view, my reflexes kicked in, and I pulled out of the parking lot extremely quickly, flooring it well over the speed limit back home. Sufficed to say, I did not return to that McDonald's. What that creature was, spriggan, doppelganger, demon, I don't know. All I do know is that I've never seen a more horrifying, inhuman creature, and I hope to never run into it again. To this day, I still sometimes have dreams about it. Take a girl's advice. If you're going to work a night shift, make sure it's somewhere a little more populated than a McDonald's in the middle of nowhere. Banshee in the Colorado Mountains, from WikkedSkittz. My husband and I moved to Colorado. I was actually raised there. I was excited to share my home city with my husband. Well, it was October 2019 and all we had was our truck and $1,000 in our pockets. The decision had been spontaneous. We bought a pop-up camper in Colorado Springs and decided to camp in Woodland Park. They have all year-round camping, and it's free. The first week was quiet, except for the folks who were illegally hunting elk out there. Now my husband got a job in town, so I'd be alone till late midnight. Of course, in October here it snows. I noticed that it would get quiet outside the camper at night. That would give me goosebumps, and I noticed my dog, a Chiweenie, would whimper and hide under my blanket. Now that's not how she usually is. She's usually attentive and guarding me. Well, that particular night, this made me nervous. I turned out my lantern and listened outside. I must have sat there for 10 minutes and heard nothing that was out of the ordinary. I go to turn the lantern back on, and I hear the strangest thing. Loud and ghostly screams. These chilling noises were coming from more than one direction. There were multiple sources. Suddenly, a bunch of guys on ATVs pass by, and the noises stop. And soon after, my husband pulls up. He walked in and looked at me, asking me if I was okay. I was pale as a ghost. I explained to him what happened. Now, my husband takes things like this seriously, whether it's supernatural or unexplained or what, and I thank him for that. He tried to make me feel better, and we went to bed around 2 a.m. But a couple of hours later, my husband wakes me up and whispers in my ear, telling me to not say anything, to just listen. The noises are back. Screams that sound like banshees all around the camper. We lay there, barely moving or breathing, just listening to the sound of these multiple things outside. My husband begins to shake. I look over towards him, but I saw from the light of the moon that right next to my husband's head, just outside the camper, which, mind you, is a pop-up camper, so it's just cloth, I saw next to him a shadowy figure. It seemed as if the figure was smelling my husband. Those screams got closer and closer all around us. It lasted for another hour. But luckily, they left. This would happen every night around 3 a.m. Towards the last of that month, before we packed up to Denver, the Banshee calls got worse. They would begin to claw and slap at the camper. Eventually, it would stop, but I remember the first time it happened. In the morning, my husband noticed he had a bad cut on his arm, and the pop-up camper's cloth had tears and scratches all over it. We were forced to have to sell it. We couldn't afford the cost to recloth the thing. What matters is we made it out of there alive. Possible Skinwalker from Levi. I'd like to begin with the typical "I'm no writer" statement, and I'm writing this to the best of my memories. It's been a while, so the time it happened is a bit blurry. I believe it was November of 2018. This was the only time I've ever seen this thing. I live in northern Kentucky, about an hour or so from Cincinnati, Ohio. I live right along a highway in a little valley-like area. Across the street is a small field. To the left of it is my neighbor's house and a yard light. Behind the field is a line of trees and a river. The field turns into a big hill. Behind my house is another large hill. And this happened around 12 at night. My family had just done laundry and all of it was still in the car. We had done bedding this time, so I went outside to go get one of my blankets. I normally look around quite a lot when I go outside at night, because I'm actually terrified of being out when it's dark, and I have been since I was little. I had just stepped off my porch, looking straight across the field. That's when I saw the most bizarre-looking thing. What appeared to be a hairless deer standing in the middle of it, facing towards me. Now, seeing deer is quite normal in the area. I live in the middle of rural Kentucky. There's deer everywhere. What really scared me about it, though, was it was hairless and pale. It had what looked like a thin layer of skin over its eyes, nose, and ears, too, as if it didn't have nostril holes or actual eyes, or at the very least, they were covered up. I froze once I saw it, and I couldn't process what I was looking at. I must have stood there for 5 minutes never moving, and it never moved too. I couldn't smell anything bad. I actually couldn't smell anything at all. Once I snapped out of my frozen state, I ran back inside to grab a flashlight and to get a better look. When I came back out, that thing had already disappeared. These other incidents are minor. It could just be me getting scared over nothing, but I figured I'd add them anyway. I used to hike a lot on and around the hill in my yard. There was a small creek going through the part of my backyard as well that separated the backwoods from the field in my backyard. I would usually go across the creek and then follow it all the way back to my property. But one day, while I was on my way back, I heard something that sounded like a chicken, but distorted. It didn't at all sound right, and it was coming from up the hill. At the time, we did have chickens, but they never went back that far or near the creek. I ended up walking quicker to the creek to try and get across without running, and it wouldn't stop calling till I got to the creek. I didn't hear it anymore after that. This is another story that happened earlier this year in April. I was out hiking again, alone of course, way back in the woods along the creek. I was no longer on my property. The people that own the land on the hill own a lot of the woods back behind us, and there are several fields on top of the hills. I was hiking up one of the old tractor trails. These were cleared out pathways from the fields going across the creek and a spot in the valley back there. I decided to step off the path to look at some moss under the cedar trees, when I heard a rhythmic, sort of clacking sound, like two rocks hitting each other down the hill from me. At this point, I was far away from the path. Where I heard it, it seemed to be coming very far right of the pathway, which was close to me. I decided to try and go towards it to see if I could spot what was making the noise, but I didn't see anything. I was texting my cousin during this, telling him what I heard. I ended up freaking out and calling my mom, staying on the phone with her until I got back home. The entire time it felt as if I was being watched. Maybe I was just paranoid. I haven't had any more incidents other than feeling a very strong presence when I go out past the creek since March. I'm not even sure what the creature was. I think it may have been a Wendigo or Skinwalker, but I honestly have no clue. Hopefully I never run back into this being again. The Hellhound That Hated Us All, from Anonymous. First off, I'd like to start by saying I'm someone who believes in the paranormal. I believe in witches, witchcraft, and all that good stuff. I've just turned 19, but this story took place when I was maybe 14. Back then, I lived in an apartment with my older half-sister and older half-brother, along with my little brother who isn't half, and my mother. I'd also like to note that in this apartment, my mom had this family picture of all 4 of us kids and her. She also had separate pictures of each of us near the kitchen along a windowsill. This is important to the story later on. Me and my younger brother came back from school to find the house empty. I forget what happened, but for some reason, my brother and I got into a fight. I, being mad, went to my room and closed the door, trying to avoid my brother in the other room. I started to watch a movie. I clearly remember it was The Blind Side, when suddenly my brother comes barging in my room. He was half out of breath and looked like he had seen a ghost. He told me, while trying to catch his breath, that he had seen a dog in the bathroom. Judging by his expression and noticing how he never laughed or smiled, I could tell he wasn't joking. He was very serious. I told him to get in my room, and I closed and locked the doors. I then grabbed 2 of my Bibles from under my bed that I kept safe in a shoebox. I gave him the older one, and I held on to the newer one, that I had recently got from my mother. We hid in my bed under the blankets, completely terrified and shaken, while grasping the Bibles close to our chests. We waited for what seemed like only a few seconds when the locked door to my bedroom just slams open hard on its own. It shook the whole room. My brother and I are completely horrified at this point. I suddenly begin to pray in my mind, asking God to take over the situation for us. Soon after I did that, we hear nothing after the door slams open, just complete silence. We waited for what seemed like forever, too scared to lift the covers off our heads. I was afraid it would show up looking for us if I did. Then my brother says, after a few minutes of waiting, that we should get up and see if it was still there in the house. We finally get up, and we found ourselves back to back, with the Bibles held out in front of us. The first thing we did was check the bathroom. We looked inside to find nothing in there. We then scanned the entirety of the house to find it completely empty and quiet. We sit in the kitchen to process what had just happened. I started to ask questions to my brother about the thing he saw. I asked him what it looked like, and he said it stood as tall as a kitchen counter, and its legs were bent looking, almost as if they were broken. He said it stood halfway behind the door, and it was facing the shower, which means the opposite to where my brother was standing. He said it was slowly turning to face him, and as it did so, he could hear its bones cracking. He said that the head of it was like that of a goat. I then asked if it was see-through or actually there, because a lot of ghost sightings are see-through. But he said he couldn't see through it, so it was really there. He explained that it appeared to have horns, and the mouth was drooling intensely, as it was chipped open like you would see on a dead goat skull, and its eyes were beady red. I was in complete shock when I heard this. I then started to process whether he was lying or not. First off, if he was lying, he would have laughed when he told me he saw it. Second of all, if this was a joke, he wouldn't be able to tell me as much detail about it, head on, like he did. Third, and most of all, if it really was a prank, how would he be able to slam open a locked door if he was by my side the whole time? He even told me not to tell Mom about it, so I did as he asked, because I myself didn't want to frighten anyone. I wished the story ended there, but it doesn't. A few days after this so-called Hellhound attack, my mother yells at all of us to get up. It was about 4 or 5 in the morning, and she was very angry at all of us. Everyone was completely clueless as to why she would be so angry as to wake us all up at this hour of the day. She then asked us in a very angry tone why we would knock over the pictures she had of each of us, and why the family picture was cracked right where all our necks met. We all looked at each other in confusion. Then I looked at my younger brother, and he gave me that same look of concern, that it might have been that creature that scared us a few days back. We still proceeded to keep it a secret, and left it at that. Later on, I asked my younger brother to draw it for me, and he did. It was horrifying, and I wish I still had the drawing. I remember telling my dad about it, and he thinks it grew from our anger, since we had a fight before it happened. After we moved out of the apartments and several months went by, I finally told my mother about it, and she was very shocked. My mother is one to believe in the paranormal, and she knows that it is very much real. So when I told her about this event, she seemed shocked, and asked me why I didn't tell her the day that it happened. I simply said that I didn't want anyone to freak out about it, and she understood. Since then, I'd have to say that this is by far the creepiest encounter that I've ever experienced, especially since it slammed open a locked door like it was nothing.